Did you know that one of England's most infamous kings exploded at his own funeral? Yep, this really happened. And if that doesn't sound gruesome enough, just wait until you hear what happened next. His guts literally burst out of his skin and landed in the coffin with him. Sounds like an action movie, right? But it was all too real. Now, before we get into what exactly happened to poor old Harry, let's take a quick rewind, all the way back to January 28, 1547. The year before, Henry had been feeling unwell and sent for Thomas Bridges, who was the secretary to the king's physician. He wanted to know what was wrong with him, and as he was putting on his stockings, he noticed that there were some concerning spots on Henry's legs. They were red and didn't look normal. He told the king to see a doctor straight away, but he refused, saying that he didn't have time. The next day, he started vomiting, and things got really bad. Poor old Henry died on January from what we think was either tuberculosis or syphilis. In those days, they didn't really know what caused these kinds of illnesses, so they just kind of went with the flow. Funnily enough though, when Henry was younger, he was a pretty healthy guy. He played sports, enjoyed jousting, and even participated in archery contests. He could ride a horse like nobody's business, and was generally very good at anything physical. However, after he married one of his wives, Jane Seymour, who died soon after giving birth to their son, Edward, he entered a very dark period of his life. He wasn't the same ever since, and started eating more and more. And not just any food, mind you, but lots of delicious pies filled with meat. His waist went from being 32 inches to over 50 inches. He got to the point where he weighed around 400 pounds. That's nearly 20 stone for a spritz. Or if you're from America, that's almost 300 pounds. During his reign, he had 6 wives, 2 of which he married in the same year. You know what they say about men with big appetites? It doesn't just apply to their food intake. But anyway, the point is he ate his way through his entire kingdom, both figuratively and literally. According to some accounts, Henry ate up to 8 courses of food every single day. Can you imagine 8 courses? Now, I don't know about you, but I would be happy with just 2 courses of food, especially if they were delicious. But this guy wanted more. Is there no end to human gluttony? He liked to eat everything in sight, and because of that, his belly got so big that he couldn't even see his feet. The king was struggling to walk, going up and down stairs. He was also having trouble breathing, and it was clear that something needed to be done. So he started wearing these tight belts to try and suck his gut in, sort of like how people used to wear those corsets. It didn't work. He looked like one of those pregnant men you see in ads for beer. Come to think of it, he probably drank a lot of beer. Henry's weight gain didn't stop there. He kept getting bigger and bigger, to the point where he couldn't fit in any of his clothes. So they had to make him new ones. At this point, he must have spent a fortune on new wardrobe. The problem was that all these new clothes were made to measure, so they weren't very good quality. That meant that when he wore them around, he constantly felt uncomfortable. This might explain why he became so grumpy and started yelling at everyone. Maybe it was a pain in the backside, quite literally. When he was on his deathbed, he was so obese that his servants had to cut open his clothes because he couldn't breathe. Now, if you thought that was gross, just wait until I tell you what happened to his corpse. Back then, doctors didn't know much about human anatomy, so they made some pretty wild guesses about how things worked. They thought that the reason Henry couldn't breathe was because his ribs were in the wrong place. So to help him out, they decided to break him and move him around. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's just break the king's ribs and hope for the best. Thankfully, he didn't wake up to find out what they were doing. After they broke his ribs, they tried to stuff his body into a coffin, and as they did, his stomach started making these gurgling noises. You know, the ones that you get when you haven't eaten in days and you finally get a bite to eat. Well, imagine that happening when someone's already dead. Anyway, at first, everyone thought that it was wine that he had drunk while he was alive that was making him burp. But then, something happened that made everyone wish they had stayed in bed that day. His stomach suddenly burst open. Yes, his guts literally exploded out of his skin. And guess where they ended up? In his coffin, right next to him. Can you imagine the smell? This must have been the smell of hell itself. People who were present at the funeral said that they saw intestines and other organs flying everywhere. Some people were so scared that they fell over and died themselves. It was a scene of utter chaos and confusion. No one knew what to do, so they just stood around watching the king's guts spill out of his mouth. The person who was brave enough to close his mouth shut said that it was like trying to shut the mouth of a crocodile. The situation got so bad that eventually they had to put a cloth in the coffin instead of a lid. You can't make that up. A cloth. They literally buried the King of England under a cloth. How embarrassing is that? I can only imagine what went on in the minds of people who found the grave years later. I bet they were asking themselves, was this really the king? Did he really explode at his own funeral? What kind of sorcery is this? To make matters worse, Henry's body started to bloat and stink so badly that they had to dig it up and move it to another location. I guess that's one way to put some bang in your bacchus. Anyway, let's get back to the story. When his remains were moved, people said that it was so heavy that it took 16 strong men to carry it. Can you believe that? 16 blokes just to move a dead body. That tells you how big and heavy it was. I wonder if anyone asked Henry if he wanted to be moved, or if he had any say in the matter. After all, he was the king, wasn't he? Well, maybe not by this point. Later on, his son, Edward, came along and ordered that his father's body should be exhumed once again. It was reinterred in St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. The new coffin was made of oak and was lined with lead. They did this because they thought that this would prevent the disgustingness from happening all over again. As a backup plan, they put a thick layer of treacle, which is a type of molasses, over his body, just in case. Fast forward a few decades, and someone decided that it would be a great idea to open up the coffin to show visitors what was inside. After all, it's not every day that you get to see the remains of a king, right? Well, thankfully, whoever decided this hadn't read the newspaper reports about what happened last time. Because if they had, they might have thought twice. Imagine the look on their face when they opened the coffin and saw black, viscous liquid dripping down the sides. Yikes. Turns out that the trickle they had put over his body to stop things from getting smelly had actually attracted flies, and the flies had laid eggs in it. Those eggs hatched into maggots, which then started feasting on the king's corpse. Needless to say, whoever opened the coffin probably never slept again. Later on, the decision was made to finally put the lid on the coffin and leave it alone. But not before they took some of the remains out and put them in this glass case in Windsor Castle. If you go there now, you can still see it. Well, if you're brave enough, the guide will tell you all about how Henry VIII exploded and how his guts spilled out of his coffin. Then they'll point to the glass case and say, look, here's some of his remains. Fancy taking a closer look? Yeah, I'll pass on that offer. Thanks anyway. So remember, if you ever go to Windsor Castle, be sure to check out the display of Henry VIII's remains. Just try not to think about what happened to his body when he died. I'm sure you'd rather not know.